Today we will take up chapter 5 of the essays on the Gita, titled Kurukshetra. Well, we have all heard about this battle of Kurukshetra, which is the central event of the Mahabharata. The event that really not only decides the fate of the two warring clans of Kauravas and Pandavas, but it is also an event that establishes the dharma that Sri Krishna wants to bring down upon earth. And also we have said that Kurukshetra war has been almost the central aim of Sri Krishna as a king, and even perhaps as the avatar, because that was the best means and perhaps the quickest means to establish the new dharma that Sri Krishna wanted to establish or bring down. So we see that whole of the story of Mahabharata, with all its very interesting episodes and events and some dramatic ways, all of these are pointed towards Kurukshetra. I mean, it is as if they were all designed by the Lord, by Sri Krishna, so that all of them converge upon Kurukshetra. So that becomes the crucial event of Mahabharata. And all of us know that it is but for the Kurukshetra war, we would not have got the Bhagavad Gita. So we can see the immense importance of this war. And also, as we said right in the beginning, that there are three important things here of the Bhagavad Gita. That is the teacher, the disciple, and the event and the circumstance. So we have had a kind of an overall view of the divine teacher, the human disciple, and also in the previous chapter, chapter 4, we have seen the core of the essence of the message of the Gita. And the core has been, as we have seen, the triple path of karma, jnana and bhakti yogas. But before we go deeper into the path itself, Sri Aurobindo kind of makes a halt and says, let us go a little deeper into the circumstance. I mean, we have had a kind of a superficial analysis of this circumstance by saying that it is the best means to bring out the true principle that Sri Krishna wants to bring down, etc. And that is also the time psychologically when Arjuna is brought between the two great armies, and then his moment of weakness comes forth, and Sri Krishna catches upon that moment of weakness, because that is the moment of weakness in everyone's life. So he says, let us take up this issue, and Sri Krishna gives the Bhagavad Gita. But then we have also said that although this conversation In fact, it is a wonderful conversation between the teacher and the disciple. Although this conversation is between Arjuna and Sri Krishna, Arjuna really represents humanity, especially the aspiring humanity. Because the questions that he has asked, the way he has pursued the argument, are really questions that come up in the mind of human beings in all their lives, in all the epochs, right from the age of Mahabharata to the present age. In every country, those who want to lead a higher life or turn their life towards spirituality have similar questions. So too we have seen in the case of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, all those volumes and questions are really not individual questions. Today when we read those volumes of Synthesis of Yoga, volume 21, 22, 23, 24, etc., we also find the same questions that we have in our mind, and therein we get the answers of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So you see, that pattern that was followed in the time of Kurukshetra is the same pattern that has been followed by Sri Aurobindo and his disciples. Of course, we have in Sri Aurobindo the major writings that came up in the Arya, that's no doubt it's there. But apart from that, there is a huge section of correspondence. And I'm told by the people in the archives that the unpublished correspondence between Sri Aurobindo and his disciples is actually as voluminous as the 30 volumes that have been brought out already. I mean, the ashram has yet to bring out those unpublished correspondence. So you can imagine what the mother told Monada. Those of you who attended his talk yesterday would remember that how Sri Aurobindo would spend nights on end in answering the questions of the disciples. That was, she would say, even kind of suspending his own work for humanity and the work of the supermind to bring it down and establish. He would take care of the answers that each disciple asked, the question that each disciple asked, because he was concerned with the spiritual growth. So this is the trend we see in Arjuna, between Arjuna and Sri Krishna. So Sri Krishna patiently answers every question and quite much in detail. So he suddenly becomes a kind of a representative of humanity. So these are not Arjuna's questions, these are questions of every spiritual aspirant. So Mahabharata or the Bhagavad Gita comes to represent humanity's aspiration towards a spiritual life. And that is how it's one of the most wonderful scriptures, because it answers questions. The other scriptures that we have in the world are the Lord thus spake. Finish it. You take it or leave it. You understand or don't understand. But here, it is absolutely contemporary trend to ask questions and get answers. So Sri Aurobindo, in the very first paragraph of this chapter, Kurukshetra, highlights this, that for although Arjuna is himself concerned only with his own situation, his inner struggle and the law of action he must follow, yet as we have seen, the particular question he raises, in the manner in which he raises it, does really bring up the whole question of human life and action. What the world is and why it is, and how possibly, it being what it is, life here in the world can be reconciled with life in the spirit. And all this deep and difficult matter, the teacher insists on resolving as the very foundation of his command to an action which must proceed from a new poise of being and by the light of a liberating knowledge. So these questions, as we see now, which represent human life in general, need to be answered, but before we go into the details of the questions and answers, Aurobindo wants to take up a fundamental question of the dejection of Arjuna. That is the very first chapter of the Gita, Bhagavad Gita. The yoga of Arjuna's dejection. Why was Arjuna dejected? Why did he leave his Gandiva? What was the disappointment? Of course, we have seen his answers, some of you may even remember. You see, one side, of course, he has this question of the moral sin. That was the first point. That if he fights and kills all these elders and his gurus and pitrus, and all these thousands of people, they have their families, they have their children and wives and mother and all that. So it will be a great papa, a great sin. So that's the kind of a moral awakening that comes in him. But more than that, the root cause of the dejection, Aurobindo would tell us here, is that the dejection and discouragement felt by the human being when he is forced to face the spectacle of the universe as it really is, with a veil of the ethical illusion, the illusion of self-righteousness torn from his eyes before a higher reconciliation with himself is effected. You see, even now we, at the present times, many a time we feel dejected. Why? When we see the condition of the world as it really is. And what is the condition of the world as it really is? I mean, we don't have to describe, those of you who watch the TV or see the newspapers. Of course, those who do not have this contact with this outer world, you are not aware of the world as it is. You are maybe aware of just the Kuchukupam and the Vaitakupam politics. But those of us who have windows into the world, we see it's a horrendous situation. In fact, if you remember, Mother told Monada way back in the 60s, which we recollect from his own talk yesterday, that humanity has reached one of the lowest depths of this lower consciousness. So you can imagine that was 45, 50 years back that Mother had said something like this. So that lower consciousness is going lower still in the last 50 years. I mean, it has gone to worse depths of inconscience and ignorance and violence. So there is this massive carnage and massacre. You see, in the name of terrorism, in the name of wars, in the name of religious wars, in the name of, war against terror, there is a greater terror. You see, we are just finding labels to kill each other. Previously, the labels were one religion versus the other religion, or one nation versus the another nation. And today we have greater war to kill, to stop all terror. So we just require change of labels, but humanity has remained the same. There has been the First World War, the Second World War, there is Iran war, there is Iraq war, there is Pakistan-India war. I mean, innumerable wars. So if you really look at the world, have we really changed a wee bit? Right from the beginning of its civilization, war seems to have been the greatest event of human consciousness. We have fought wars to end wars, but there has been no end to wars. So that is what Aurobindo would say in the second chapter, in the paragraph that I am reading into. It is that aspect which is figured outwardly in the carnage and massacre of Kurukshetra, and spiritually by the vision of the Lord of all things as time arising to devour and destroy the creatures whom it has made. You see, this is the root cause of Arjuna. And it's so similar to the root cause that we have in the present times. That is, when he looks around, he says, this is the massacre that I'm supposed to do. I mean, it's like You are getting ready to throw the bomb on Hiroshima. And you know how many millions of people would die. So that is the moment in which Arjuna is also situated. He says, now if I fight, that is the rivers of blood will flow in this Kurukshetra field. So you can imagine, even the imagination is so abhorring, so appalling, that it puts Arjuna into a great dejection. And then, to top it all, he is also given that Vishwarup Darshana, that grand vision of the Lord. But all of us know it is not a vision of the Supreme Purushottama in his benevolent form. What do we see? Here the Lord as time the destroyer. So he comes and shows to Arjuna that I am the destroyer, I am time, I am Kala. And what is that horrendous scene that we see? All these people are being devoured by the same Lord who created these people, who is maintaining this earth. He is the one who is devouring. Arjuna can see waves of armies entering into his mouth, killed and entering. So you can imagine a young warrior, on the material, physical level, he sees this massacre, and on the spiritual level, he sees a greater massacre. It's as if the whole world is getting destroyed. So who won't be dejected by this horrendous sight? If we see one man killed, a little bit of blood on the road, we have this jugupsa, a reaction. But here is a thing that is really beyond the mind's comprehension. This is the vision of the Lord of all existence as a universal creator, but also the universal destroyer, of whom the ancient scripture can say in a ruthless image, the sages and the heroes are his food, and death is the spice of his banquet. You can see the realistic picture that when we think of God, is not just God love, God as love, or God as mercy, or God as bliss and all that. But here there's the other side of the same divine, that for whom the sages and the heroes are his food, the food of the divine. Divine as time the destroyer. And death is the spice of his banquet. Imagine the Lord doesn't bother about who is dead, who is killed, nothing. Like we have spice in our food to make it tastier, he brings in death into this world so that Kala, what devours, is much more spicy. It is one and the same truth seen first indirectly and obscurely in the facts of life, and then directly and clearly in the soul's vision of that which manifests itself in life. So that is the same vision, the practical vision and the spiritual vision. And of course, most of you would know here why the Lord shows that aspect of time the destroyer. Because when he sees that, after that only, Arjuna says, Lord, I cannot see this anymore. Please show me the other side, the merciful side of your being. Then Lord Krishna withdraws his time, the destroyer, and shows him the benevolent, the beautiful, the merciful aspect. So what it means is the Lord is both the destroyer and the creator. So, and this Sri Krishna in fact shows Arjuna this aspect only to convince him that what you are going to do is already done. You are not going to kill any people. They are already killed, he says. They have already been killed and they have come back into my being. It's only to convince him, look, things first happen in the spiritual, subtle physical level. What all happens upon this earth is only a result of what has already happened in the subtle physical worlds. So that is the truth that Sri Krishna shows him. And also to take away this sense of sin that Arjuna is having. To tell that you are not sinner. I have already done it. All the people whom you are going to kill, or whom Yudhishthira is going to kill, or even whom Dhritarashtra is going to kill, from both sides. Because people are going to kill each other. So all these are already killed. So that is the kind of a impact that Sri Krishna is making upon Arjuna. So the outward aspect is that of world existence and human existence proceeding by struggle and slaughter. The inward aspect is that of the universal being fulfilling himself in a vast creation and a vast destruction. See, outwardly, we have to accept that our life is full of struggle. And of course, as part of the struggle, there is also the slaughter, the killing. As I have already said, the slaughter and this killing only changes its labels, but it has been there throughout human history. And inwardly, that means on the spiritual level, this universal being, or the Lord, whatever we want to say, is fulfilling himself in a vast creation and a vast destruction. You know, we have this great analogy of Shiva Tandav, the dance of Shiva. In India, we have always held that when something has to be created, something needs to be destroyed. So destruction and creation are the two different sides of the same coin. So one cannot be there without the other. It's kind of, destruction creates space for the new creation. That's what we said on our individual level also, that if you want to receive the divine grace and divine consciousness and divine power, you have to empty. Destruction is emptying, in another form of self-emptying or self-rejection. So when there is this emptying of oneself or emptying of things upon earth, then the new creation comes. You see, when we want to build a house there, we demolish the old house, raise it to the ground, clean up the ground, and then we start the new building on the same spot. So this is the eternal law. There's nothing, at least Indian philosophy, Indian spirituality realized these two aspects of the divine. In fact, we'll come to that later. So this is the rhythm. Life a battle and a field of death. This is Kurukshetra. God the terrible. This is the vision that Arjuna sees on that field of massacre. Well, here actually, this chapter takes off from here. He has just given us maybe 2 paragraphs which are directly connected with Kurukshetra and the Gita. But from here, Sri Aurobindo takes off into a kind of a deeper philosophy of war itself, the necessity of war. Why is war important and what is the need of war? Not only on the physical level but on the spiritual level itself, why there is this destruction. So almost till the end of this chapter, that too just en passant, as we say, just by chance it comes back. It is a philosophy of war and God the terror. And that's why this chapter is really, a chapter that stands by itself. It need not be there in the essays of the Gita or connected with the Bhagavad Gita. It has a little link. But here we see one of the fundamental aspects of the divine which have not been much discussed about. But here Sri Aurobindo traces historically, that's what is beautiful here, both in the East and the West, the same philosophy of war has been recognized as one of the most fundamental things of human existence. Well, we start off here with Heraclitus. War, said Heraclitus, is the father of all things. Now, Sri Aurobindo has a beautiful chapter on Heraclitus. You may see volume 16 of SABCL. And he has taken pains to write about Heraclitus. And because if you read this chapter, you will see how Heraclitus comes very close to Vedas and the Vedanta. I mean, it's quite unusual that in the Western philosopher we have such glimpses which are very close to Vedanta. That is one of the reasons why Sri Aurobindo picks up Heraclitus. And obviously we know that Heraclitus and Buddhism are very close to each other. Obviously he might have been influenced even by Buddhism, which again means he might have been influenced by the Vedanta. So there are roots of Heraclitus going right to the Vedanta, through perhaps Buddhism. So this is why Sri Aurobindo perhaps deals quite at length on Heraclitus, and those of you who have some time on hand and a bit of interest in the mind should read this chapter. It's about from page 332 up until 370 or so. It's almost 50 pages of this volume. Is quite a long thing. Well, of course, I will take up a couple of paragraphs here, and I'm going to deal a little more at length because Sri Aurobindo gives just one or two sentences from Heraclitus, and then he goes on to explain further. So I would rather go back to the original version where he describes the philosophy of Heraclitus and its different aspects. Here on page 356 of this volume, the part that is relevant to us is mentioned. You see, Heraclitus is again one of those Greek philosophers who have really dealt with the question of one and the many. When we speak of the Vedantic and the Vedantic philosophy, that we are describing about who is the Brahman. The Brahman is one. And then we said he is the one who becomes the many. So in the Isha Upanishad and other Upanishads we have said this is the center of Upanishadic philosophy, that one and many. And of course that has been the center of Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine also, how this world is created from the one and by the one. The same quest is there in the Greek philosophers. The being and the becoming, the one and the many. So that is what is very interesting to us also, that they have also sought the same questions. But we see a line, a couple of lines perhaps in the foundations, if I remember right, foundations of Indian culture. Sri Aurobindo mentions about the innate connection between the Greek philosophers and the Upanishads. You see, there is a link. Upanishads have had, as it says, a tremendous influence on the Western philosophy right from the Greek times. But they absorbed the thought in their own manner and they expressed it in their own way. So it is not that they are repeating the Upanishadic experience, but they have caught the essential message of the Upanishads. And the Greeks, being what they are, brilliantly intellectual, wonderfully logic and a clarity of mind, they gave to the West a completely different picture. They brought in a new aspect of the human consciousness, the aspect of a critical, analytical mind. So they were extremely acute in their philosophical approach. So they also started with the questions, what is the reality behind this world? What is the essence of this world? Who is the being of this world? Some said air is the essence of this world. Some said water is the essence of this world. Some said fire is the essence of this world. Some said matter is the essence of this world. Essence means what we call as Brahman, they put it as the essence of water or air or matter, etc. But again, that had a deeper symbology. And here, Heraclitus would say fire is the essence of this world. And in a way, at least now in modern terms of Sri Aurobindo, how fire is symbolically the essence of the world. If fire represents the supramental consciousness, yes, supermind is the essence of the world. So although Heraclitus perhaps did not reach to these heights of symbology, he did catch the meaning, the glimpse of this truth. So here we say a line from Sri Aurobindo from page 344 of the same volume. Being is an eternal becoming, and yet the becoming resolves itself into eternal being. All is in flux, for all is change of becoming. We cannot step into the same waters twice, for it is other, and yet other waters that are flowing on. You see, we have the same image in Buddhism too, that he would say, we cannot step into the same waters twice. The same image that Buddhism had used, Heraclitus is using. And again, what the Buddhism had said, that all this world is a flux, is a kshanikavada, it changes every second. The same thing comes with Heraclitus, wherein he is saying that all is in flux, for all is change of becoming. You see, what these people conceived is the change itself is eternity. They gave the image of the flame, why they are calling as the fire is the essence. They says, take the flame for example. You see a candle and a big flame. The flame is never static. It's always moving, changing, in a flux. So with each flux, it has a different form. So there's essentially the same fire, but that is changing its forms. So they say there is a being, but that being is changing its forms, and these are the forms which we call the becoming and the multiplicity. So they have touched the Upanishadic truth, that there is one consciousness, essentially there is oneness, and it is this oneness which is becoming without ever losing itself. So you see a simple example, but a very apt one. So here, one is that there is, the becoming is the eternal thing, because there's nothing more real than flux itself. Flux means change, and change is the eternal, is eternity itself. It says that process he sees as a constant change and a changing back, and an exchange and an interchange in a constant whole, managed for the rest by a clash of forces, by a creative and determinative strife. War, which is the father and king of all things. So he conceives that war is the king of all things. And then he would say, to explain further, Aurobindo would say that Heraclitus is the first thinker to see the world entirely in the terms of power. That is something now we are getting anew. And please keep this in mind, because we are going to link it up with our own Indian philosophy. So Heraclitus is the first one to see the world as power. Now we can understand a bit of what it means. When we say that this world was created by Chit Tapas, consciousness force. So Heraclitus is reaching the same truth intuitionally, that this world is essentially a consciousness power. Vedanta says the same thing. So he did catch this meaning, and once the world is seen as power, now what is the nature of power? Strife, movement, clashes, an eternal flux. Power never remains static. It's always moving. Force, is always going around. And once there are force and forces, there is a constant battle, a constant clash. And so you would say, what is the nature of this exchange? It is strife. Eris. It is war. Polemos. What is the rule and result of the war? It is justice. A very strange idea. He says the war is the essence of the world, because war is the only means to bring about justice. Difficult to accept. Perhaps more for the Indians who believe in this non-violence. That how can violence bring in justice? But Heraclitus said, the aim of war is to bring justice. In what way? How acts that justice? By a just tension and compensation of forces which produce the harmony of things, and therefore we presume their stability. War is the father of all and the king of all things becoming according to strife. To know that strife is justice, these are his master apothegms in this matter. At first we do not see why exchange should be strife. It would seem rather to be commerce. Strife there is, but why should there not also be peaceful and willing interchange? Heraclitus will have none of it, no peace. He would agree with the modern Teuton that commerce itself is a department of war. It is true, there is a commerce, gold for commodities, commodities for gold, but the commerce itself and all its circumstances are governed by a forceful, a violent compulsion of the universal fire. So now you understand that there is this question of, the clash, the strife brings in a kind of a harmony. Each one trying to, in mathematics, I think, or physics, not mathematics, we did hear of this, formula. If there's only one force that is pushing, this object gets pushed. But if there's an other force coming from the other side and this force is coming this side, then the object remains in the same position. So like that, when there's a clash of different forces, then there is a kind of a constant stability. And why does he call it justice? Because each one gets what he or she deserves in this strife. So in fact, in this chapter you will see, Aurobindo says, that's what is the meaning of Darwin. Struggle of the when the strongest, the fittest survives, the survival of the fittest. So when there is a clash, it's not difficult to understand. Look at our own Indian politics. There's a constant and absolute and a constant fight, clash, strife. Nobody is letting the other go forward. Nobody does let the others do something good. But amongst all these clashes and strife, somewhere the country is gaining. What it was 20 years back, what it was 15 years back. Today, India is supposedly a great power in the eyes of the world. But how did we come about to this level of a stable country, a growing country, a rich country, a powerful country? It's not any one party, it's not one man. There has been a constant struggle, push and pull, breaking down each other. But somewhere that has brought about a progress in totality for the country. So if you understand this, because you're all Indians here, you would agree with this, that no single party put India ahead, but it is this constant strife and the struggle between the parties. So that is what Heraclitus would call as justice. Justice means a kind of a stability, a kind of a progress, something moves forward. So he would say that war, contends Heraclitus, is not mere injustice, chaotic violence. It is justice, although violent justice, the only kind possible. Again, from the point of view, we see that he is right. By the energy expended and its value shall the fruits be determined. And where two forces meet, expenditure of energy means a trial of strength. So he would say that when energy meets with another energy, there is strife. There's bound to be. Even a simple fact that I'm really pushing this thing on my table, this is a clash. Let's not think always clash means a high thing, world wars and Iraq war and American war and Pakistan. This is not just a strife. Everywhere there's an energy. If I push this object, there is a strife, because this object tried to resist and I'm trying to pull it. So there is strife between this object and myself. So it is as fundamental as that. So let's not all the time think of wars. So everywhere there is this process of power, energy. And when two energies meet, there's a clash. So if I am more powerful, I pick it up. If I have to lift a big, huge rock, the rock is more powerful in its energy. It resists and my force does not work on it. So he would say, everywhere there is this same phenomenon of power and force. So he says that is where the energy comes to meet each other, there's some kind of a reward and the weaker one loses there. And then of course, not only between being and being, force and force is their war, but within each there is an eternal opposition, a tension of contraries, and it is this tension which creates the balance necessary to harmony. This is a personal thing, an individual thing. He says, don't look at these world wars and the nation wars and all that. There's a war constantly going on within me, within the individual himself. Because my mind is saying something, my heart is saying something else. So there is a clash and a strife in the individual, inside the individual himself. And how am I progressing? Out of this clash, sometimes I decide with my feelings, other times I decide with my mind, sometimes I hear to the advice of others who tell me to do something. There are all kinds of forces. And in all this, I progress. You see, so Heraclitus seems to be pointing towards some eternal truth. That kind of peace is staticity. Peace is static. War is progress. You can very well see or maybe anticipate what this could have led to and what this can lead to. And in fact, that is what has happened with a great man called Hitler. If this is what we think, peace is static and war is progress, then why not war? And that is why some kings and some, great rulers, they get to war because they think war is the great progress. And maybe can we share a common truth that all wars are meant for an economic progress of the country. I mean, we have heard of USA's war on Middle East, on Iraq. How much of their own ammunition has been, used up so that it is reused and remade so their economy moves on. I mean, these are the inside secrets of war, which is an open thing now. So every country goes to war at a time where it says, hey, my economy is flagging. So a war, I waste a lot of material pumping out onto the enemy, but then I make all those things again, all the armaments and everything, and then my things move. So this is a very funny situation, but that is the reality, that everywhere war has been used for economic progress, for political progress, for national ambitions, for whatever it is. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us here, in fact, that there is war on every level, strife on every level. And that seems to be the law of the world's progress today. I mean, you may feel hurt, we may feel bad. And after all the philosophy of non-violence in our country, we may think if this is right. But you don't have to think about it, this is the fact. So he would say that this is the kind of situation that has arisen. And the last line about how Sri Aurobindo gives his answer to Heraclitus. I mean, this is the synthesis I wanted you to listen. I mean, this a master like Sri Aurobindo alone can give us. He says, European thought, following the line of Heraclitus' thinking, has fixed itself on reason. Has fixed itself on reason and on force, and made them the principles towards whose perfection our being has to aspire. Force is the first aspect of the world, war, the clash of energies. The second aspect, reason, emerges out of the appearance of force, in which it is at first hidden and reveals itself as a certain justice, a certain harmony, a certain determining intelligence and reason in things. Now, this is the analysis that the first instrument that we use in this world is war. Go and bomb Iraq. First instrument. You create a kind of an atmosphere and all the big talks and all that. But out of that now you reason out. Why did I do that? Because I want to bring a democracy to Iraq, to Middle East and all that. So now they are trying to reason out. It's not there. It's every country that does the same thing. I mean, after all the clashes, even in our normal life, there's a fight at home and then say, okay, now keep cool. Why did you do that? So let's take a step forward. Let's not fight. So there is reason that comes out. And this is what happened in the Western civilization. Out of war, there came about reason. And now today, if reason is ruling the Western mind, it is the natural outcome of the first instinct of war. They have very well utilized that, because reason, I mean, we in India can understand in the light of Sri Aurobindo now, where there is chit, where there is tapas, there is chit. So when there is force and power, there is the consciousness. Consciousness represented as reason. As the mind consciousness, the mental consciousness is what? Reason and logic. So in the West we have a strong reason and logic, because that has been the natural outcome of this war instinct. It's not that in India it wasn't there. Everywhere the war instinct is the same. But this product of reason came out very strong in the West. And he would say, the aspect reason emerges out of the appearance of force, and that brings a certain sense of harmony. You see what happened in the war, Second World War, First World War. We had immense wars, destruction. But out of that war, there came about the reason of the United Nations of organizations. There came about a certain sense of harmony, a certain sense of peace, a certain sense of unity, a certain sense of oneness. They couldn't have done the same thing 4 years before. No. They had to go through the second war. Then only the idea of the United Nations came about. So you see, somehow we see this is the reality of the world. A war comes, then reason takes over, and then reason becomes so blatant and so egoistic and so very individualistic and so much of a hardliner. Reason becomes unreasonable, it becomes dogmatic, and leads to the next war. So you see, this is the perennial cycle that is happening. So war will never end as long as reason is the master. Because reason becomes unreasonable, war comes in. War shatters the previous unreasonableness. What did the second war shatter? It shattered the unreasonable, egoistic tendency of the nations in Europe at that time. Each nation becomes so very individualistic, selfish, egoistic, that war had to break it down. And then only people, out of all this massacre and suffering, they said, oh, let's not do it again. So people sat together, rationally they found a solution, split Germany into 4 parts so that nobody is powerful enough, and the Russians and Americans and French and everybody occupies the country. Germany is splitting it up into pieces. So that is how reason came through, and it lasted. But again, this reason got blasted with the Iraq war. They don't even listen to the United Nations, which they themselves created. But the United Nations is no more the advisory board, because the individual reason became so very powerful, it becomes irrational and disobeys their own organization, and you see there's a new cycle of war continues. So, I'm giving you pertinent examples because we all know these situations. It's not that I'm against this or that, but it's an ample example of how human consciousness moves. And that's what we see, Heraclitus' principle being applied. And now what Sri Aurobindo is saying is, the third aspect is a deeper secret behind these two: universal delight, love, beauty, which taking up the other two can establish something higher than justice, better than harmony, truer than reason, unity and bliss, the ecstasy of our fulfilled existence. This is the secret. You see, European civilization stopped short. They went from war to reason. But in India, Indian spirituality gave us the third and the final step, because there is not only Sat Chit Tapas, there is Ananda. So the end is that we must move toward the delight, the Ananda aspect, not stop with power and force and war. So he says we have to move towards the bliss. And what is that bliss? Which means it is a unity and bliss ecstasy. So of this last secret power, Western thought has only seen 2 lower aspects: pleasure and aesthetic beauty. A very beautiful paragraph, but a summary, commitment. He says that Western thought has caught this Ananda, but in its very preliminary levels of pleasure and aesthetic beauty. So you see what is happening today, the whole world under the grip of pleasure. Call it the vital pleasure or the physical pleasure or the aesthetic beauty. It has missed the spiritual beauty and the spiritual delight. So he says, for that reason, Europe has never been able to develop a powerful religion of its own. It has been obliged to turn to Asia. You see, now we see why the West comes to East for spirituality, for the spiritual beauty and the spiritual delight, which they have missed out. They got caught up in pleasure and aesthetic beauty. These are wonderful single sentences, but covers a whole civilization. You see, this question of pleasures, everybody has pleasures, East and West. But in East, we have had this extra dimension of spirituality. So there is, as we said, artha, kama, moksha. There is this ideal of dharma, there is the ideal of salvation, which was always, hovering upon your consciousness. Hey, don't lose your path here. There's something called moksha. So that has been the hovering thing. We have not succeeded, true. But there is an alternative, a higher hovering consciousness. But unfortunately, the West doesn't have this at all. So they get lost in this aesthetic beauty, beauty of the body, beauty of the dresses, beauty of the makeup, beauty of the things, beauty of the society, beauty of the roads. A great achievement. But those are the lower ends. The higher ends are the spiritual beauty and delight, which has been missed out, and for which the West now comes to East. Because they have seen enough of pleasure and this aesthetic beauty. So there is a kind of a dimension seeking for the spiritual beauty and delight. And there, East has been the great success story. So maybe we have taken that, and now we are taking the aesthetic beauty and the pleasures from the West, aping them in all that. But we still have got the treasure of the spiritual beauty and delight. And that's why Sri Aurobindo says that Europe has never been able to develop a powerful religion of its own. I mean, we know Buddhism went from India, and there's a recent book that I read, it was written 30 years back, that Christ came to India and he lived here, he learned from the Vedas, he went to Banaras, he learned the Upanishads, he was influenced by Buddhism. So Christianity has its roots in India again. Buddhism has its roots in India, surely. So he says, West has never developed its own religion. It had to depend on the East and in India. So we see, now the whole picture emerges, that what Heraclitus says, war is the principal thing, is indeed true. And even now, war is the principal factor, which is pushing mankind further. All our developments, millions of dollars put in the army. Why? Because each country wants to become the most powerful country in the world. And for that military, millions of dollars pumped in, what happens? Economy increases, technology increases, science is put into service. So that has become a kind of a progress in the material world. So what Heraclitus told many years back, what Buddha said many years back, seems to be a fundamental truth. We like it or not, it is the truth. But there is a progress to be made. But that progress will be made tomorrow, when the human consciousness becomes spiritual. Up until now, we are on the rational, mental, logical level. So reason and war go together. They are sister concerns. When reason is there, war is inevitable. When you go beyond reason, war then becomes, it can be avoided. So you see the simple logic. Why now Sri Aurobindo speaks of a spiritual age? Because with the coming of the spiritual age alone, you can stop the wars. Otherwise, the Mother has given many a time messages that each nation, when it starts thinking unegoistically about really the world peace, then only we will have world peace. But today you ask every country which goes onto the mics and says we want unity and peace and democracy, how much do they really want that sincerely, with an absolute honesty? I doubt even if there's one soul in the world, in the political field, which really wants unity. Each political leader wants things for his own country, call it selfishness, call it nationalism, whatever. But as long as this egoistic tendency is there, you cannot think of unity. So Sri Aurobindo's effort to take humanity beyond reason. You see how fundamentally Sri Aurobindo, how basically he works there. He doesn't give you some isms and systems and do's and don'ts. What will they do? You'll practice for 50 years, 100 years, they forget about it. So this is the fundamental approach of Sri Aurobindo. And from here, you see, I'm leading you to all this because this is the meaning of Kurukshetra. Otherwise, people do not think, they blame Sri Krishna saying, hey, why did he have to kill millions of people? Is it Sri Krishna is a wrong man, is a wrong leader and all that? There have been criticisms. But that is why Sri Aurobindo takes up the analysis of Kurukshetra itself. Yeah? Well, we'll also take a little break from our own Kurukshetra.